Good evening. Today is Sunday, March 29th, 2026. I'm Rich Stevens, and this is the Cold Take. What you're about to hear is news from this week, taken only from primary sources like press conferences and court documents. You can find those sources and attribution for every story at thecoldtake.com. We begin in Florida, where on Friday, March 27th, just before 2 p.m., Tiger Woods was involved in a rollover crash in Jupiter, Florida. Police said Woods was driving a black Land Rover at high speed when he overtook and struck a trailer heading in the same direction. This caused his vehicle to roll on its side and slide for some distance. He exited through the passenger door and when police arrived showed signs of impairment. Woods was taken to jail, where he passed a breathalyzer but refused a urinalysis and was then arrested for DUI. Police said he was cooperative and no injuries were reported. On May 29, 2017, Woods was arrested by Jupiter police when he was found asleep in his car a few miles from his home. 2 days prior, on March 25th, Florida man went even harder. 58-year-old Brian J. Parker told deputies, quote, "I don't remember anything. I was at my house and went to an AA meeting and, doing cocaine, drinking, and smoking pot." Parker drove through a locked gate at Daytona International Airport and onto a taxiway. Once there, he attempted to board an occupied plane operated by Embry-Riddle. Deputies took him into custody at the scene. Authorities said no injuries were reported and airport operations continued despite what appears to be a brief test of the unofficial drive-up boarding system. Parker faces charges including attempted aircraft piracy, felony trespass, and DUI with property damage. This is an older story, but I came across it this week and I thought it seemed relevant. Monday, June 30th, 2025, the Justice Department announced its 2025 National Healthcare Fraud Takedown. They charged 324 defendants in schemes involving more than $14.6 billion in intended loss, calling it the largest healthcare fraud takedown in department history. DOJ said a related investigation, Operation Gold Rush, produced the largest loss amount ever charged in a healthcare fraud case, with 19 defendants charged across 5 districts. Prosecutors say the scheme used stolen identities from more than 1 million Americans to submit $10.6 billion in fraudulent Medicare claims for urinary catheters and other durable medical equipment. DOJ said 12 defendants were arrested, including suspects apprehended in Estonia, at U.S. airports, and at the U.S.-Mexico border. The department said Medicare paid about $41 million, supplemental insurers paid about $900 million, and investigators seized only $27.7 million in fraud proceeds. On Sunday night, March 22nd, Air Canada Flight 8646 collided with a Port Authority firefighting vehicle at 11:49 p.m. The aircraft was carrying 72 passengers and 4 crew, with 2 crew aboard the fire truck. Officials said around 40 people were hospitalized and that both pilots lost their lives in the crash. The fire truck was en route to a United flight that had aborted takeoff, stating that there was an odor in the cabin that they wanted investigated. The NTSB has 25 hours of audio and 80 hours of data from the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. The complete timeline of events is on thecoldtake.com, and you can subscribe to get updates when they're available. On Monday, March 23rd, the New Mexico Department of Justice said a jury found Meta liable for misleading consumers and endangering children, ordering the company to pay $375 million in civil penalties. New Mexico says the jury imposed the maximum $5,000 per violation under state law. A separate California case produced $3 million in compensatory damages, another $3 million in punitive damages, at a 70-30 split between Meta and Google's YouTube. New Mexico says a bench trial on its remaining public nuisance claim begins May 4th, where the state will seek additional penalties and court-ordered changes to Meta's platforms. Monday, March 23rd, the U.S. DOJ service said more than $1 billion in federal student aid fraud had been stopped since January 2025. Officials reported nearly $90 million was already paid out, including $30 million to deceased individuals and over $40 million to AI-generated students. The schemes used automated applications and synthetic identities to access federal funds. A new identity verification system flagged roughly 150,000 suspicious identities in its first week. In world news, as of Saturday, March 28th, Operation Epic Fury is still underway. CENTCOM says it is still continuing to strike Iranian military targets, including launch areas and port facilities tied to operations near the Strait of Hormuz. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said on March 26 that Iran's naval capabilities had been heavily degraded and that the IRGC Navy commander had been killed. The White House indicated possible diplomacy, saying a pause on strikes against energy targets is in effect after, quote, very good and productive conversations with Iran. Iran's foreign ministry responded on March 28th by blaming the U.S. and Israel for the conflict and stating that the Strait of Hormuz is closed to U.S. and Israel-affiliated vessels, with other traffic allowed only under Iranian coordination. Regional governments, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan, have condemned Iranian attacks, while Oman has called for a ceasefire. In U.S. politics, a pair of election fraud cases. On Tuesday, March 17, 2026, at a Georgia House Government Affairs Committee session, witness Mark Cook stated that voting systems used in Georgia are vulnerable to manipulation and that votes can be altered after casting. No published technical report, court ruling, or official government finding has been identified validating these claims. Prior state audits and investigations into Georgia's election process did not document machine-based vote manipulation. Back in February, the Alabama Secretary of State announced that a Russell County grand jury indicted 3 individuals on a combined 33 counts related to absentee election law violations. The charges stem from ballot harvesting and related ballot offenses. Secretary of State Wes Allen said, quote, absentee ballot harvesting is not being tolerated in Alabama. These arrests send a clear message to those contemplating violating Alabama election law. On Sunday, March 22nd, President Trump announced that ICE agents would deploy to airports across the country Monday. Amid the ongoing partial shutdown, they would be used to ease pressure on TSA. Democrats expressed their opposition, with Chuck Schumer saying, quote, ICE agents don't know the first thing about airport security. They weren't trained to screen travelers. DHS, ICE, and TSA all touted the move as helping to move lines along faster. On Monday, March 23rd, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Watson v. RNC over whether ballots must be received by Election Day. Mississippi argued voters complete their choice by Election Day even if ballots arrive later. Challengers argued federal law requires ballots to be both cast and received by that day. Justices focused on defining when a vote becomes final and whether Election Day is a hard cutoff or a deadline for voter action. Hit subscribe and we'll notify you when the court issues a ruling. On Monday, March 23rd, the Pentagon announced that it was closing the correspondence corridor and moving credentialed reporters to a new annex outside the building. This comes after a federal judge struck down key parts of its October 2025 media access policy. Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell said the department would appeal, but added, quote, effective immediately, the correspondence corridor is closed. The dispute began in May of 2025 when the Pentagon tightened press access rules and said new measures were needed to, quote, reduce opportunities for in-person, inadvertent, and unauthorized disclosures. The court later found that the October policy allowed the department to suspend or revoke press credentials on broad security or safety risk grounds, saying the practical effect was, quote, to weed out disfavored journalists. Judge Paul Friedman wrote, quote, that is viewpoint discrimination, full stop. According to the ruling, Times reporters and most other Pentagon credential holders refused to sign the policy and turned in their badges in October. On March 20th, the judge ordered the Times credentials restored. 3 days later, Parnell said the Pentagon would comply with the order, appeal the ruling, and replace the old in-building press setup with escorted access and a new outside workspace. On Monday, March 23rd, the Senate confirmed Markwayne Mullin as Secretary of Homeland Security by a 54 to 45 vote. The White House said he was sworn in the following day as the department's 9th secretary. Mullin is a business owner, rancher, and former member of Congress. At his confirmation hearing, he said, quote, "If confirmed, I will enforce the law as it is written. I cannot pick and choose which laws to enforce." Supporters praised the confirmation, with Senator James Lankford saying Mullin, quote, "knows how to lead and how to get results," while Senator Tammy Duckworth opposed it, saying, quote, "he lacks the qualifications for the job." On Wednesday, March 25th, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in Cox Communications, Inc. v. Sony Music Entertainment that an internet provider cannot be held liable for copyright infringement based solely on knowledge that its users are pirating content. The case stems from a 2018 lawsuit where music labels won a $1 billion jury verdict against Cox, alleging it failed to stop repeat infringement by its subscribers. Lower courts allowed liability to stand based on Cox's awareness of that activity. In a unanimous decision, the court reversed that standard. Writing for the court, Clarence Thomas said, quote, "A defendant may be held liable for contributory infringement if it intentionally induces or encourages direct infringement, but not merely for providing a product or service that is capable of substantial lawful use." On Thursday, March 26th, the Department of Justice announced it had secured the denaturalization of 2 individuals who obtained U.S. citizenship through fraud. The department said one of the individuals, Vladimir Volgev, concealed his role in a conspiracy to smuggle more than 1,000 firearm components out of the United States. Officials said both individuals lost citizenship after failing to disclose criminal conduct during the naturalization process. Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, "American citizenship is a sacred privilege, not a cheap status that can be obtained dishonestly." The Justice Department also said it filed a separate complaint to revoke the citizenship of a 3rd individual accused of marriage fraud. On Thursday, March 27th, the House Ethics Committee found 25 counts proven against Florida Congresswoman Sheila Sherfilis McCormick. The counts include misuse of official resources, undisclosed payments to herself, and improper campaign contributions. Sherfilis McCormick is also facing a separate federal criminal case in South Florida. In November, the Justice Department said a federal grand jury indicted her and co-defendants for allegedly stealing $5 million in FEMA funds, laundering the money, and using it to support her 2021 congressional campaign. Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, "Using disaster relief funds for self-enrichment is a particularly selfish, cynical crime." The Congresswoman denied the charges, calling the indictment, quote, "an unjust, baseless, sham indictment." In the ethics case, she moved to dismiss and stay the proceedings, but the committee denied those requests before holding the March 26th hearing. Hey, is this thing on? Sometimes I think I'm talking to myself. If you got this far in the video, maybe I'm not talking to myself. Give it a like, share it with your friends, hit that subscribe button to get notified of new videos, and prove to me that I'm not just talking to a microphone that's plugged into nothing. Today marks day 43 of the partial government shutdown. That's the beginning of week 7. The Senate passed an amended version of H.R. 7147 in the early hours of Friday morning with only 5 senators present. The package funds TSA, FEMA, the Coast Guard, and CISA, while excluding ICE and Border Patrol. The House did not adopt that version. On March 26th, the House passed H.R. 8029, the Pay Our Homeland Defenders Act. Then late Friday night, the House passed House Resolution 1142, setting up its response to the Senate amendment to H.R. 7147 with a further House amendment. I don't know how we get through any of this without drinking. Because the House and Senate have not passed matching legislation, no final bill has been enacted and the shutdown continues. Lawmakers from both parties are publicly blaming one another for the standoff. Mike Johnson said, quote, "For the third time, Democrats pledged their allegiance to criminal illegal aliens over American citizens." Lisa McCain said, quote, "Enough is enough. Get your priorities straight. Fund our national security and pay our homeland defenders." On the other side, Hakeem Jeffries said Republicans are, quote, "holding TSA agents and air travelers hostage to their extreme immigration agenda." Chuck Schumer said Republicans should, quote, "reopen DHS, pay TSA workers, and rein in ICE." With both chambers advancing different funding approaches and no agreement enacted, the partial government shutdown remains in effect on day 43. Markets continue a 5-week slide. The Dow closed at 45,166, a loss of 391 points, or just under 1%. NASDAQ fell 699 points, a 3.23% loss, and that index closed at 20,948. The S&P 500 lost 137 points, more than 2%. At close Friday, that index sat at 63.68. Gold gained $32 and closed at $4,524 per ounce. You can see that over the last 6 months, market indexes are down between 2 and 7%, with current values down between 8 and almost 12% from their record highs in early February. Gold, meanwhile, has lost 14.6% from its apex, but remains up more than 20% over the 6-month period. And in sports, Major League Baseball kicked off on Wednesday night in San Francisco in a game that saw the Yankees plate 5 in the second inning and win 7-0. When they faced off again Friday, Aaron Judge started things off with a 2-run bomb in the 6th. Stanton followed with his own home run, and the Yankees took Game 2 3-0. Most teams have only played 2 games so far, but the Dodgers and Yankees are both undefeated with 3 wins apiece. The White Sox already have a -17 point differential, while Milwaukee leads the majors at +17 after only 2 games. Formula One is in Suzuka, Japan this weekend. Drivers continue to complain about lack of speed after regulatory changes have significantly limited the cars. Alonso said, quote, "It still hurts your soul when you see your speed dropping so much. 56 kph down the straight." Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc said, quote, "I honestly cannot stand these rules in qualifying." 4-time world champion Max Verstappen called his car undrivable. Rookie Kimi Antonelli took pole for Mercedes, overshadowed by the regulatory changes. His teammate joined him on the front row with the McLaren of Oscar Piastri starting 3rd. Antonelli was able to win the race, taking a 9-point lead over his teammate George Russell and sitting on top of the driver's standings. With Saudi Arabia and Bahrain canceled, the next race is Miami on May 3rd. Finally, in college basketball, number 1 seed Duke and Arizona won their Sweet 16 games against St. John's and Arkansas respectively, advancing to the Elite 8. 2 seed Purdue edged 11 seed Texas 79-77 and advanced to face Arizona. Purdue led Arizona by 7 at the half, but the Wildcats outscored the Boilermakers 48-26 in the second half to advance to the Final Four. 2 seed UConn similarly snuck past Michigan State 67-63 and will face Duke tonight. In the South bracket, Iowa beat Nebraska, and 3 seed Illinois got past 2 seed Houston. Illinois defeated Iowa 71-59. 6-seeded Tennessee beat 2 seed Iowa State 76-62 to be the last SEC team in the tournament. The Volunteers will face 1 seed Michigan, who handled Alabama 90-77. Today's games will lock in the Final Four matchups for April 4th. And like it or not, that's what happened. I'm Rich Stevens, and this has been The Cold Take.